evening, everyone. My name is Christina Lampert, and on behalf of our entire capstone team here at Columbia University, instructed by Dr. Bob Cook, I am so excited to present our work that we've done with the World Resources Institute, otherwise known as WRI for the sake of tonight, on the African Forestry Landscape Initiative. So first and foremost, I think it's important to provide some context around land degradation and specifically how it pertains to Africa. So as you may know, land degradation essentially impacts soil fertility as well as increases biodiversity loss, all of which ultimately impact human provisions on ecosystem goods and services. And because land degradation can be caused by natural forces like desertification as well as drought, Africa is getting hit extremely hard, relatively speaking, compared to other countries. In fact, the WRI reports that an estimated 65% of Africa's land is now degraded, negatively impacting food security as well as livelihoods, and it also is impacting their economy as well. They report that 3% of GDP is currently lost annually from soil and nutrient depletion on African cropland itself. So as a means to mitigate against this problem, the African Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative, otherwise known as AFR100, was founded in 2015 by 10 African countries. And it's essentially a country-led effort to bring 100 million hectares of deforested and degraded land in Africa into restoration by 2030. So far, there's been an incredible amount of commitment. We've already seen $1 billion in development finance allocated, as well as $481 million of private sector funds committed in order to fund these restoration projects. So where does our client fit into all this? The WRI is a managing partner of AFR100, and they essentially developed this platform called Teramatch, which I'm going to walk you through and help you understand where our group fits in. So there's two groups of people involved here. First is the funders that essentially go into the Teramatch platform and basically state how much they're willing to give capital-wise to fund restoration projects. And then on the other side, there are also project developers, smallholders, and farmers who are on the ground in Africa that have these restoration projects ready to go. This group is represented often by NGOs as well as small, medium enterprises, otherwise known as SMEs, who typically do the application for funds on behalf of these developers. So both of these parties go into the platform and they essentially match with each other just based off of funding needs and project development needs as well. So in terms of the scope and where the Columbia Group fits in within all of these stakeholders and initiatives is, at large, we were tasked with accelerating AFR100 by enabling more funding for restoration projects in Africa through this Teramatch platform that WRI has developed. And so WRI asked us to do two things specifically. The first is auditing the application process. So if we can put ourselves in the minds of the NGOs, as well as the SMEs who essentially are applying for funds on behalf of the smallholder farmers, we were tasked with just kind of understanding where there are inefficiencies in this application process, requesting for funding, and also what improvements can be made with regard to how WRI is reviewing these applications and accepting and rejecting them. We were also tasked with creating a ladder approach, and this is essentially what kind of training and steps can we offer to these applicants so that they can increase their chances of funding in future rounds if they were rejected last time around. In order to execute on this scope of work, we conducted a variety of different data collection methods, which you can see on our left-hand side here. We were fortunate enough to actually meet with internal WRI employees to really get a sense for why and how are they accepting and rejecting specific applications and what their process looks like there. We were also fortunate enough to meet with actual NGO and SMEs who had experience being accepted and rejected by the Teramatch platform specifically. So extremely fruitful, and we'll walk you through some of our recommendations that were informed by those interviews. We also looked through and sifted through actual applications from both for-profit organizations and non-for-profit organizations. We looked at peer registries to get a sense for what are other registries doing that we can kind of marry into the Teramatch platform. And we also looked at surrounding African restoration projects that have already been put in play, really just to kind of get a sense for the landscape. Out of all of these, we've represented a variety of African countries data-wise, which you can see here. So out of these data collection methodologies, essentially our findings deduced a variety of key recommendations, all of which were categorized for organizational purposes into 3 specific categories. The first type of recommendations are technical. So these are recommendations that refer to tools and upgrades that will essentially make the application process much more streamlined for applicants, but also more organized for WRI on the back end. The second category is support and feedback recommendations. So these refer to process improvements in communication with applicants who may not be funding ready right now, but should they incorporate this support as well as feedback, they could become funding ready if that was successfully incorporated and receive funding. The last set of recommendations in terms of category is capacity building, otherwise known as our ladder approach segment of the scope. And we'll walk you through exactly what we're thinking here. This is essentially a group of recommendations where we come up with programming in terms of educating applicants who were rejected in the past in terms of how they can get accepted for funding in the future. So first I'll start with our key technical recommendation. Essentially, we found that in our external interviews, there was a lot of frustration from applicants about not being able to save their application information over time. We learned that some people on the ground in Africa would travel hours just to get internet and fill out the application. Their internet would crash and they essentially would lose everything and have to start from scratch. Furthermore, if they got rejected, essentially they were so time constrained that they didn't really feel it was feasible to apply all over again because none of their information was saved the last time. So we recommend to WRI that they execute on the ability to save this application info over time. In terms of support and feedback, we learned through our external interviews that applicants, when rejected, didn't really get any feedback why. And so they didn't really have anything to go off of to improve their application for the next round to increase their chances of funding, thus accelerating AFR100. So we feel this is a huge roadblock that could essentially be mitigated if WRI provides comprehensive rejection feedback, perhaps in the form of an itemized report. In terms of our ladder approach recommendations, we are essentially recommending that WRI provides a series of webinars as well as training for applicants who essentially were rejected in the past to get them into that next segment to achieve funding the next time. And we're really recommending that through this medium of webinars and training, WRI focuses on 3 key important topics for this education. The first is business model improvement. We found that a variety of applicants were essentially rejected because they couldn't provide long-term organizational sustainability documents, long-term records for environmental and social impact, long-term business documents, and things along those lines. So this will really help them develop on that specific piece for their application. The second is restoration project management. WRI is essentially a leader in this already, and so perhaps this is space for WRI to present to applicants, help educate them on exactly what they are looking for and what that criteria is for a successful restoration project so that the applicant can integrate that into their next application and make sure that comes across clear. The last topic here is funding logic and guidance. We learned that applicants actually were simply rejected because they asked for too much, and so providing guidance on what is reasonable amount. We also experienced a variety of challenges, both internal and external. Internal, extremely hard to make decisions within a large group. External, extremely challenging, thinking about the complexity associated with our pool in Africa. We hope that once these are executed, we can experience the following outcomes. Applicants who are applying for the first time will understand exactly what's being asked of them. Applicants who have been rejected will have a clear understanding of why and where improvements can be made. WRI will have a scalable way to review all of the applications, and this in turn will increase our likelihood for applicant funding, restoring more land in Africa and accelerating AFR 100 at large. Thank you so much for listening, and we would be happy to take any questions.
Hi, Christina. Great presentation. I also very much like the business model improvement part. And I guess going with that, with the technical portion, did you also consider maybe looking at the actual application and kind of trying to shorten it as much as possible? So maybe the next part of the process can be, I guess, the longer portion, but we know that the organization is, in a sense, clean and can move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And to be candid, a lot of our initial work for the project was actually focused on, like, we honestly thought we were looking at the questions, and then our client was kind of like, actually focus a little bit less on the questions and more of like the bigger picture themes for the application. So yeah, I think that's a great point, but we actually were steered a little bit away from actually altering the questions in themselves, because they seem to be like pretty set in stone criteria wise for WRI, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did WRI give you any restrictions or in terms of feasibility of implementation of findings that you came up with or may have come up with?
Yeah, I think that's another great question and something we certainly thought about. That was something that we dealt with regard to the complexity challenging. So there wasn't too much guidance for that. But what we were able to do in our final paper is essentially come up with a chart that helps them understand our hypothesis of, hey, these recommendations are probably going to be easier to implement and more feasible versus those that are going to be more challenging. But to your point, it's still kind of an outstanding challenge because we don't have that feedback yet from them. But we're hoping to glean that once we present our findings.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I have a very small question about the countries that you showed were within the region. I saw New Delhi there, so I'm confused. Are you only considering countries in South Africa, or are you looking beyond that?
No, that's my fault, and that should have been deleted. So
Okay,
yeah,
no
thank
problem.
you for catching that.